Kiola. Good morning. Thanks everyone for joining me for this section. And so for today's section, I'm on behalf of my lovely co-authors, Shuri, Zach, Pike, and I'm going to present a study called The Impact of Busy Road Frontage on the Adoption of Good Management Practices. And we're looking at the New Zealand farmers. Some research background for this study. You might be all aware of this issue that New Zealand agricultural industry is facing the challenge of maintaining its economic contribution to New Zealand, but under the increasing environmental awareness and also public scrutiny. And in particular, the public scrutiny makes it very hard for the industry to maintain its the so-called social license to operate. And the definition for this SLO is that this is a kind of informal approval or acceptance from the community that grants a business or industry to operate. Intuitively, in New Zealand, it's very easy for us to relate the adoption of good management practices to the maintaining of SLO, because we assume that adoption of good management practices might meet the societal expectations in terms of the environmental and social performance of farming for farmers. So the question, well, as I said, intuitively, it's easy for us to relate the adoption of good management practices to maintaining or obtaining SLO. But the question in front of us is that what if the good management practices are not observed from the public, or it might be hidden from the public eyes? And if this is the situation, do farmers or will farmers feel the same? Or are they still feel the same pressure to adopt good management practices? Or are they still willing to pursue the adoption of good management practices? So this kind of thinking leads to the research question of this study is, are there any differences in the adoption of good management practices between farmers who are located on busy roads and those who are not? Well, bearing in mind with this question, we had a look at the literature. And so the existing study showed us that to date, so far, the relationship between the road frontage and SLO have mainly been restricted to a lot of qualitative study. And to our best knowledge, no study has focused on relating farmers' adoption of good management practices to SLO. So for this study, we are aiming to explore the impact of road frontage on New Zealand farmers' adoption of good management practices. And we specifically are interested in the question that whether or not being observed to the public, which we defined as being located in front of a busy road, can affect farmers' adoption of good management practices. And we assume that good management practices adoption is related to gaining SLO or maintaining SLO from farmers. So the conceptual framework of the study is starting from using a cluster analysis that consists of two steps. Firstly, we use principal component analysis to reduce all the 51 good management practices that were asked in the survey. And so by using this technique, we managed to reduce the dimension of 51 good management practices to 10 clusters. And followed by that, we further use K-means cluster to readjust each individual farms, so each observations to the center of the specific clusters. So that makes us to group all the farms based on their good management practices into 5 groups of farms. And with that information of the 5 groups of farms, we can further feed the result into regressions. We mainly look at 2 types of models. Well, one model, but 2 types of sample. So by looking at the full sample, we use a binomial model to looking at the relationship between road frontage effect on good management practices. where we used good management practices as a dependent variable, where road frontage effects are the key independent variable that we're interested in, and we also controlled for other farm and farmer characteristics. And we also are specifically looking into each of the 5 farm groups, again, by using binomial models for each group of the farm, and looking at the 5 subsamples using kind of the same model, binomial model, looking at the relationship between farm frontage and the good management practices. So before jumping to the results that I would like to share with you, I would like to firstly give you a brief about the cluster analysis process that you might not be familiar with. So this method has been very often used in marketing analysis, and researchers are always interested in product differentiation and market segmentation. And in our study, so the first step of the cluster analysis helped us to reduce the dimension, the so-called features. And in our study, it is the good management practices, while we're still able to maintain the variance of the data. So here's an example that I can show you in terms of the top 10 clusters in the principal component analysis. And by following an album rule here that I'm showing you, it shows us the indication that cluster of 5 clusters might be a good number for us to categorize all these farmers into based on their adoption of good management practices. Followed by the principal component analysis, we use k-means clustering techniques to readjust the distance between each individual farms here to the center of the identified clusters that we got from the first component analysis. So that's kind of the way that really focus on the individual observations, in our case, that are the farms, by summarizing the specific individual to the means of different clusters. So the data that we used for this study was from a 2019 survey of rural decision maker data. And this is a large-scale survey of farmers, foresters, and growers all over the New Zealand. But in our study, we only consider sheep and beef farms and dairy farms. So that gave us a sample of 1,240 farms. And in this study, we specifically look at 7 main types of good management practices, including, for example, soil compaction plugging, water management, waterways management, affluent management, and etc. And each of the main type of good management practices consists of several set of good management practices. And that gave us 51 good management practices in total. So some preliminary results that I would like to share with you from the cluster analysis. So as I said, based on the 2-step class analysis methods, we managed to group our sample farm into 5 groups. And I would like to show you the 3 groups in the first stage. So for the 3 groups, they are either high adopters or low adopters. And the difference between those 2 low adopters is, well, for those 2 low adopters, one group, which we labeled it as, gave it a name as water worry-free, is this group of farmers don't really have waterways to manage. But relatively speaking, they are all low adopters in terms of good management adoption rates. So looking at the high adopters, overall, they did a really good job in adoption of good management practices. So they had over 68% adoption across different types of good management practices. And for the second group, the low adopters, this group, well, compared to the high adopters, they did not really do a good job in terms of the overall good management practices adoption. So they only have an adoption rate of 34.2%. And the very last group is the water worry-free. They're also a low adopter group, but as I said, they don't really have waterways to manage, and they have an even lower good management practice adoption rate so which is about 29%. And here I also showed you some characteristics of the key farm and farmer characteristics. We can see that the values of those characteristics vary across those three different groups of farms. So, right, so the graph in the middle that I'm showing you is kind of going into the details of different types of good management practices across those three groups of farmers. As you can see, the purple bar represents a relatively good adoption rates across different good management practices for the high adopter farm, where compared to the high adopters, the low adopters, for example, for the low adopter group, they did not really do a good job across different types of good management practices, and they did not have a soil compaction parking management, and they didn't really have a formal farm plan, either relevant to environment or stock management or etc. And for the water worry-free group, they did not really do good, so they kind of the bottom level of good management practices. As you can see, the gray bars are relatively low. So this are the three main groups, either high adopters or low adopters. And the other two groups of farms, they are kind of in between. So they are either high adopters or low adopters. And again, we labeled them with two names. One is the runner-up, because they, relatively speaking, compared to either the high adopters and the low adopters, they did a relatively okay job in terms of good management adoptions. This is relatively good. The adoption rate is over 57%, but they didn't really have soil compaction and parking management. And for the group we labeled not a planner, their overall adoption rates of good management practices is relatively okay, but they didn't really have a formal farm plan. That's why we named them as a not a planner. And so again, I'm showing you all the different types of farm and farmer characteristics. We can observe those values vary across those two groups, and also we can definitely compare those values to the previous three groups, and differences exist in the farm and farmer characteristics. So by having those cluster analysis results, as I said, from the conceptual model, we managed to feed the cluster information onto the second stage regression model. So here I'm presenting you the 5 subsamples analysis. So this is kind of the way to measure the road frontage effect within each farm group. So for each of the 5 subsamples, we run the binomial regression models for each group, and where we have independent variables are the good management practices. 1 represents adopt, 0 not adopt. And the independent variables include busy road frontage and other control variables. Because the busy road frontage effect is the issue that we're really interested in, so here I'm only present the estimated odds of being in front of a busy road. So all the columns here represent the different models of good management practices. For example, is management of erosion or sediment, management of soil compaction and parking, and etc. And the rows represent the 5 subsamples of our cluster analysis. So I've highlighted the low adopters and the high adopters. Those are highlighted in light yellow. The reason of doing this is because those 2 subsamples are the groups of farmers in the model that shows a high responsive to the road frontage effects respect to good management practices. So for example, the interpretation for this value, 1.3, for low adopters, this shows that for the low adopter farm groups, farmers being located in front of a busy road are 30% higher likely to adopt good management practices for water waste management. And
15 minutes.
And we can interpret kind of the same coefficient like fertilizer management here. For low adopter farmers, they are 110% higher likely to adopt good management practices for fertilizer. So some conclusion from the preliminary result is we do observe the busy road frontage effect across different farm groups, across those 5 clusters. But this positive busy road frontage effect only found to be significant between the group of high adopter and the water worry-free group, so the low adopters with no waterways. So the good management practices are found to be significant in response to the busy road frontage are the erosion sediment management practices and the soil compaction and parking management practices. And although the low adopters were found to less likely to adopt good management practices, so those 2 practices, but being located in front of busy roads may reduce the distance from the low adopters to the high adopters. And as the slides that I'm showing you, we also found significant positive effect of busy road frontage within each farm group, and especially within the group of high and low adopter farmers. And that kind of gave us the indication the high adopter farmers and the low adopter farmers tend to be more responsive to be seen by the public, and they might see it as a way to maintain or gain their social license to operate. And other than the busy road frontage effect, education as one of the control variables was found to be positive and significant across different models, which is consistent with the previous studies results. So I'm not showing you the busy roads frontage effect across farm groups, but if time permits, I can show you that slides later on. So that's it. Thank you.